Hey Denchbags, what's going on? It's Landon Remixes here, and it is time for my review of the debut album from the British house music duo Third Party. This one is called Hope. Now, probably like a lot of people, I originally found out about Third Party because they had a collaboration with Steve Angelo called Lights that was on Swedish House Mafia's final project Until Now. Although I'd probably say that a vast majority of listeners probably came to know them through Lines and the Wilder collaboration with Martin Garrix, and that's because Martin is very big in the mainstream right now, arguably even more mainstream than the Swedish House Mafia were. I'd probably say that Lights was arguably one of my favorite tracks on Until Now, but other than that, I wouldn't say that Third Party's music has really stuck out to me. I can't say I'm a really active fan of their music. I do, though, remember hearing a remix I really liked of theirs of Sigma's Nobody to Love, which I actually thought was pretty funny because Sigma's original Nobody to Love is just a remix of Bound To by Kanye West. All that aside, that kind of got me to start listening to Third Party a little bit again, and then I was actually pretty stoked when I saw that they were collaborating with Martin Garrix. And needless to say, this album's announcement very much so caught me off guard. I think I found it actually randomly while looking at iTunes dance music pre-orders, especially since the only extended work they had done prior to this album was the short EP Nation in 2015. I guess I kind of just didn't expect them to whip out a debut album so randomly. Now, like I said, in the past it's not like Third Party has released the most unique productions in the world, so what really caught my eye with this album? What were my first impressions when it came to this? Now, actually, my first listen through this album, the main thought that was rolling through my head was I feel like this would be the kind of sound that Swedish House Mafia would have had if they were putting out a full album themselves instead of just a compilation album. Now, this might sound like an absolutely huge compliment given how big of a Swedish House Mafia fan I am and how influential their music was in my current taste in electronic music, but I'm not entirely sure that's true. Looking back at groups like the Swedish House Mafia, I kind of have the same kind of feels that I do for Excision. I love them as DJs, I love their mixing skills in that aspect, but I think compilations work a little better for them than their general music because I feel like they didn't have necessarily a unique enough sound to be able to push out something like this. So that's kind of the position I'm stuck in with this album. Now, one of the main picks I have with this album is one of the same picks that I have with a lot of different electronic music albums. I talked about this in my Project 46 review, I talked about this in my Benny Benassi review, and I've talked about it in a number of reviews because I just absolutely cannot stand it when artists reuse old content for albums. I find it pretty funny how this album was put out on Release Records with an exclusive license to Armada Music when none of these singles were released on Armada. Two of them were previous singles on Release, so those are kind of understandable. But then we've got two other songs, one of those being Every Day of My Life, which was a release on Steve Angelo's label Size, and then of course there's Lines in the Wild, which was put out on Martin Garrix's label Stampede. Really though, my main confusion comes with Every Day of My Life, which was released almost 3 years ago. And my confusion with the song isn't the fact that it's so old, but the fact that it's labeled as a VIP mix when I literally could not tell the difference between the version that's on the album and the original of it. I mean, other than the fact that they kind of dropped that groovy intro that was in the original version on the Size release. Labeling it as a VIP just makes no sense to me. Call it an album version or something, but there's very little variance in this production. I will say though, there are some praises that I have to sing about this album. One of those being that this age in electronic music, there seems to be this huge disconnect between listeners of that big room progressive house style and that neoclassical progressive house sound. They both kind of stem from that same spot with that classic progressive house sound. Artists like Eric Prydz are still doing that kind of sound. At some point along the way, dance music transitioned from this classic progressive house sound to the more modern big room house sound that we hear in a lot of Martin Garrix's music. And I think a big part of that transition was the rise of the Swedish House Mafia, who really popularized that sound. And I think because of Third Party's ties with the Swedish House Mafia, this album works as an incredible transition piece between those two periods. In fact, I kind of feel like they push across this theme just within the first 4 tracks of the album. Without You and Veins, for example, to me sound a lot like they could have been Eric Prydz songs. Live Forever sounds like it could have fit very snug in with songs like Don't You Worry Child, and then Guiding Light sounds much more modern, pulling inspiration from more contemporary producers like Mance and Martin Garrix. And then of course I feel like this theme is repeated a couple more times throughout the album with a couple exceptions. For example, the song Arrival, which is now one of my easy favorites from Third Party. It's an electro house jam. And then there's the song Get Back, which honestly reminds me of a lot of the stuff on the Until One compilation by Swedish House Mafia. I kind of feel like like if those sounds were translated into a more modern setting, this would be the kind of sound there is. And of course, because of that, I'm getting a lot of nostalgia from a lot of the tracks on this album. And I feel like in large part, that's one of the big things about this album. I think a lot of people are going to enjoy it because of that nostalgia factor, especially me myself. But when it comes to coming back to this thing as a modern work and something that I can come and go and criticize, this album just isn't huge. And you know, it's great, but it's also kind of sad when the main thing that I'm getting from this album is that nostalgia. Remembering that Swedish house sound, that was one of the first styles that got me into electronic music. Here's the gist of it. Here's what I'm trying to get at. If Third Party would have released this album in, let's say, 2011, this would have been absolutely monumental, even groundbreaking. But it's not, because the Swedish House Mafia popularized this sound in 2011 and 2012, and it seems like Third Party kind of followed in their footsteps. So while Axwell and Ingrosso are off doing their own thing as a duo, taking on all these contemporary styles, and Steve Angelo's out there innovating, as you guys know, I loved his debut album Wild Youth, we've got Third Party who have essentially perfected Swedish House Mafia's sound from 2012. And while that makes it a good, nostalgic, and enjoyable album, that doesn't mean it's great. I will say though, hats off to you, Third Party, for making one of the only progressive house albums that I've enjoyed in the last few years. That was really cool. For Hope, I am feeling a light to decent 6.5 out of 10. I would definitely suggest this LP to anyone who is getting into electronic music around the same time as me, which would be the 2010 to 2012 range. And for anyone else, this album might seem a little outdated, but I would probably suggest you check it out anyway, because there are some goodies in here. Anyway, as always, I have that Spotify link in the description so you guys can check it out if you'd like to, and if you have listened to this album, I would suggest you leave a comment letting me know what you think about it. Anyway, I'm Landon Remixes. I hope you guys enjoyed my review, and I'll see you later. Peace.